Good afternoon. Thank you all for braving a lovely Canberra winter day to make it here. My name's Genevieve Bell and I'm the 13th Vice-Chancellor of the Australian National University. And my job here is threefold. First is to acknowledge where we are today on the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and to pay my respects on behalf of the institution to the First Nations people of this place. I want to acknowledge any First Nations people in the room today and to think, as I do every day, what it means that we're on land that was always sacred and never ceded. As some of you know, I spent most of my working life in the United States, and I reflect on the fact that for 30 years living in America, I never heard the names of the First Nations people on whose country I was standing called. No events commenced acknowledging the Lenni Lenape or the Mashantucket Pequot or the Algonquin or the Alawan or the Shoshone Bannock. And I think about those silences and I think about what it means to be here and to be so abundantly clear upon whose lands we are standing. I also think about the obligations that come with acknowledgements like this. It's not just enough to say where we are. It comes with an implicit, and I sometimes think explicit, way that we should commit. How we commit our time and our resources and how we choose to show up in the conversation. For me, thinking about acknowledgements is not just about acknowledging where we are, it's about what the values of this institution are. That we ought to, through our daily labour, also be thinking about issues around truth and justice and reconciliation, sovereignty and self-determination. And so acknowledging where we are is also about acknowledging who we are and the work we still have to do. In addition to acknowledging where we are today, it is my extraordinary privilege to reflect a little bit on what this institution means in terms of the Pacific so that I can welcome a much favoured alumni to the stage. Many of you know the Australian National University was founded by federal legislation back in the 1940s. I ponder often these days how extraordinary it is to imagine a government, a political regime, deciding that what a country needed was a university. I imagine what it would be like in 2025 for a government to decide that an answer to how a country wants to be and how it wants to think about its future is to build an institution like this. But the reality is in the 1940s, Prime Minister Chifley and his colleagues looked around the world that they found themselves in and they thought about what they wanted for Australia, and they decided that the conclusion to that desire and the manifestation of their aspirations ought to be a national university. And they were clear that that national university had several really important things it needed to do. They believed it needed to have a point of view about economic recovery for a country in the post-war period. They also believed that this should be a place that had a thought about how to build consciously and deliberately society in a post-war period. They were also quite convinced that they didn't know very much about the place they physically found themselves, that Australia was not actually a satellite suburb of London, but was in fact firmly and resolutely in the middle of the region that we know as the Asia-Pacific. And that it wasn't enough to think about the history of England and Europe. We needed to understand the history of this region, but also its cultures and its aspirations for itself moving forward. And that it was our obligation not just to make sense of it, to be a friend and a colleague and an ally and a place that was part of the flows of ideas and people in this region that we now know. The legislation that called this university into existence commands that we create and transmit knowledge through research and teaching of the highest quality. And it also says that we should do that with an eye to thinking about the Asia and Pacific region. That was true in 1947, it remains true in 2025. How we think about and what we do for the region is a hugely important part of what this institution stands for and what it has. One of our 6 colleges is the College of Asia and Pacific. It is a proud part of the ANU's tradition and a proud part, I hope, of both its present and its future. It is a place where we think deliberately and deeply about this region, about what there is to know about it and how we should contribute to it, and how that knowledge should, through teaching and research, help make this place extraordinary, and our colleagues with it too. So in getting to be on the lands of the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri, and getting to be at a national institution, one of the extraordinary things one gets to do here is to be the stopping place for people as they visit Canberra. Many people have graced this stage in the time I have been Vice-Chancellor. None have been such a distinguished alumni of the institution. I'm incredibly pleased that we're getting to welcome here today the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, alumni of the university, which is how we'd like to claim you, but a man of extraordinary distinction in many other ways. He brings with him also the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Labour and Trade, the inaugural High Commissioner of Tuvalu to Australia, as well as other members of his government. In the audience too, we have members of the senior leadership team of the Australian National University and the senior leaders of DFAT. All of them, I hope, would feel welcome here today, and I hope the Prime Minister more than most. Before I let him speak, however, I get to do one more thing, Prime Minister, if I may, which is to call on the ANU Pacifica Student Association, who would like to do something cultural for you, if that would be okay. All right, good people, that's your call. Cue now. Oh my God. Hey. I didn't realize I was up for it too. Thank you for the I want to offer my thanks here as the ANU Pacifica Student Association garlands members of our visiting dignitary party here. As one of my colleagues was reflecting in the previous half an hour, the ANU has had a long history of welcoming students from the Pacific here, and in recent years we have had a student association as well as a steady set of extraordinary cultural and pastoral support, not least of which is this particular acknowledgement, Prime Minister, of you, and unexpectedly of me. I want now to welcome the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, Prime Minister Teo, to the stage.
I can assure you that no one is getting married this afternoon with all the garlanding. Vice Chancellor Bell, distinguished academics, members of the leadership of the Australian National University, members of the diplomatic corps, officials from the DFAT, and also, I also acknowledge my delegation, the Tuvalu Minister for Foreign Affairs, and our other senior government officials. Firstly, let me also acknowledge students and members of the public that are present this afternoon. Let me, first of all, thank you for turning up to this talk, and thank you so much to you, Vice Chancellor, for the invitation to speak this afternoon. But let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather this afternoon, and I pay my due respect to their elders, past, present, and incoming. Vice Chancellor, what an enormous honor and pleasure to be back on campus and to have been invited to speak as the Prime Minister of Tuvalu and as an alumni of the law school of the Australian National University. For information for those that may not know, I studied here at the ANU in 1995, and I completed my program in the middle of 1996. After my time here at the ANU, I returned to Tuvalu with a Master's of Law degree, majoring in public laws. I also happened to carry back with me to Tuvalu a trophy in the form of our third child and son who was born here at the Warden Hospital which I understand is called the Canberra Hospital, in November 1995. So my family has a deep emotional connection with Canberra and the university. 30 years has passed since we left ANU and Canberra, and much has happened to me and my wife and our children. I have been back to Canberra several times on work-related visits, but my wife, Tausanga, who is with me, is visiting Canberra for the first time since we left 30 years ago. And she has been a little emotional and sentimental since we arrived last Friday. Ladies and gentlemen, I and my delegation are here in Canberra, principally to open the new Tuvalu High Commission to Australia, which is an honor that I did this morning. A very significant and historical milestone between Tuvalu and Australia relationship that signifies the renewed and elevated relationship between the two countries, underscored by the landmark Feleti Union Treaty between Tuvalu and Australia that came into force in August last year. I would also be having a few bilateral meetings here in Canberra, including a meeting with the Prime Minister Albanese, and some of his ministers before we return on Wednesday morning. Tuvalu Vice Chancellor has had a long and close affiliation with the university. Apart from myself, I know of another current minister and present and former ambassadors and high commissioners and other senior government officials who also study here at the university. And I hope we can continue to maintain that relationship well into the future. And I'm glad to observe that we do have a few students that are currently studying on campus. For this afternoon, I have chosen to talk on Tuvalu's situation and experience countering the impact of climate change, in particular climate change-induced sea level rise. The phenomenon of climate change has been overwhelmingly recognized and declared by the leaders of the Pacific Island Forum as the greatest existential threat to the lives and future prosperity of the people of the Pacific region. The grave injustice or irony of the threat of climate change is that climate change is not of our making, but it will certainly remake us. Climate change is multifaceted and multidimensional. Climate change manifests itself in many ways, including more severe and frequent cyclones, extended droughts, sea level rise, ocean acidification, coral reef bleaching, and changes in the migration and distribution patterns of the highly valuable tuna stocks of the Pacific. For Tuvalu and other atoll island nations, and there are only 4 in the world, 3 of them are located here in the Pacific: Tuvalu, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and Kiribati. To them, climate change-induced sea level rise is the most severe and destructive manifestation of climate change. So sea level rise poses an existential threat to our economies, to our culture and heritage, and to the very land that has nourished our ancestors for centuries. Let me just provide some context. Current forecasts for Tuvalu, in terms of the current rate of sea level rise, if that rate is not altered and reversed is that more than 50% of Tuvalu's land territory will be regularly flooded and inundated by regular tidal surges in a matter of a mere 25 years' time, by 2050. These are regular tidal surges. They haven't factored in more severe cyclonic conditions, which will exponentially expedite the reaching of those thresholds. Added on to that forecast, in another 50 years afterward, in 2100, the forecast predicts that more than 90% of Tuvalu's land territory will suffer the same fate. Those are frightening and dooming forecasts. And I hope, like hell, that they are wrong. But the evidence is unfortunately very clear as daylight. Climate change and climate change-induced sea level rise is no longer a speculative future scenario. It is happening right now. It is now a daily and lived experience for people on atoll nations like Tuvalu and the many coastal and low-lying communities around the world. So Tuvalu is sparing no efforts to future-proof the integrity and habitability of its land territory, to ensure that Tuvalu survives as a nation and that our people will continue to enjoy a way of life that they are accustomed to. Ladies and gentlemen, there are three key aspects of my talk this afternoon. The first concerns Tuvalu's coastal adaptation efforts. The second concerns Tuvalu's effort to influence the development of international laws and state practices as they relate to the impact of sea level rise. And thirdly, I will provide some brief reflections on the landmark Feleti Union Treaty between Tuvalu and Australia as it relates to climate change and sea level rise. Firstly, in response to the serious and catastrophic forecast on the inundations of the islands of Tuvalu, if the current rates of sea level rise is left unchecked, previous Tuvalu government have initiated what is now called the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation Project, in short TCAP, which has become the national flagship adaptation project for Tuvalu. My current administration continued to support TCAP, using funding from the Global Green Climate Fund and the Australian government. Tuvalu has undertaken several coastal protection projects, which will be an ongoing project well into the future, with a new additional phases and iterations have been planned for. TCAP serves two objectives. The first is to enhance the resilience and adaptability of the coastlines of Tuvalu. And secondly, to reclaim much needed land for development and public use purposes. The most significant coastal protection project is a major land reclamation project on Funafuti, which is Tuvalu's capital. In the first phase of the project, we have managed to reclaim around 7.5 hectares of land at a higher elevation than most part of the capital. Sand is extracted from the lagoon and used for reclamations. Last year, we launched the second phase of TCAP with the support of the Australian and New Zealand government. This will extend the land reclamation efforts on Funafuti with an additional 8 actors of safe and flood-free land. On the outer islands of Tuvalu, the TCAB project is constructing what are called berm top barriers, or reef top barriers, and CB revetments, which provide a barrier against storm surges. These specifically built walls aim to protect critical infrastructures on the outer islands. We certainly learned some very hard lessons from cyclones Pam in 2015 and Cyclone Tino in 2020 of how destructive storm surges can be on low-lying atoll islands. Many buildings were damaged and crops destroyed. These new barriers will help protect important infrastructures on the islands, including churches, school, medical clinics, and food crops. The TCAB project has also developed a free digital platform that allows community to track shoreline changes and to design climate adaptation strategies. We are convinced that if we can build enough protection measures, Tuvalu will survive as a nation. We know it can be done, and we stand ready to ensure that all our people have a future on Tuvalu. Many of our neighboring countries have visited Tuvalu to see how we have become a leading small island state in enhancing vertical adaptation through TCAB for the survival of our people. With our coastal reinforcement activities, we do acknowledge that sea level rise may still affect some of our islets, which in turn may challenge the viability and legality of our maritime boundaries, and even the future statehood of Tuvalu as a sovereign and autonomous country. And that is the second focus of my talk in terms of Tuvalu's efforts to influence state practices and international law on the impact of climate change and sea level rise. Tuvalu is a member of the Pacific Island Forum, and there are 18 members of that collaboration who have long been concerned about the impact of climate change and sea level rise when they collectively acknowledge climate change as the single greatest threat to the regional security of the Pacific. In response to that collective acknowledgement, the Pacific Island Forum has issued two related political declarations. The first one is the 2021 Declaration on Preserving Maritime Zones in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. This declaration asserts that Pacific Island countries will maintain their maritime zones without reduction, notwithstanding climate change-induced sea level rise, provided that their maritime boundaries are duly demarcated in accordance with the provision of the UN Law of the Sea Convention. And they are also duly registered with the UN Secretary General as required by UNCLOS. The second declaration is the 2023 Declaration on the continuity of statehood and the protection of persons in the face of climate change-related sea level rise. This declaration affirms the principle of statehood continuity that members of the Pacific Island Forum claim for their countries, despite the impact of climate change-induced sea level rise, and afford protection for the rights of affected people. The principle of statehood continuity and the permanency of maritime boundary espoused by the two Pacific Island Forum declarations were further embraced and supported by the 39 member states of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS, which are all small islands and low-lying coastal developing states and members of the UN in their September 2024 Leaders' Declaration on Sea Level Rise and Statehood. A month after the adoption of the AOSIS Declaration, in October 2024 in Apia, Samoa, the same principles were further supported by the 56 members of the Commonwealth in their 2024 Commonwealth Ocean Declaration. Also, on the 25th of September 2024, the United Nations General Assembly, for the first time, convened a dedicated high-level meeting on sea level rise. This is the first occasion that the United Nations General Assembly has considered sea level rise as a standalone issue. Unlike in previous occasions, sea level rise has always been considered as part of the broader discourse on climate change. At the opening of the high-level meeting on sea level rise at the United Nations General Assembly, I was honored to be invited to speak on behalf of the 1 billion citizens of the world who are directly affected by the impact of sea level rise. At the opening of that high-level meeting on sea level rise, I spoke. I strongly advocated for a UN declaration on sea level rise, a declaration that should have the following features. Firstly, to ascertain the principle of statehood continuity as a tenet of international law and international cooperation. Secondly, to reaffirm the permanency of maritime boundaries demarcated in accordance with the provision of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Thirdly, to call on the international community to enable climate mobility pathways that facilitate movement safely, orderly, and with dignity. Fourthly, to call on the international community to devise concrete programs to safeguard our unique culture and heritage. Fifthly, to call on the international community to establish dedicated and innovative financing mechanisms to support the positive adaptation journeys of the most vulnerable communities. And sixthly, to establish a dedicated platform to share best practices, innovative solutions, and necessary data and analysis to support informed risk disaster management decisions in affected countries. And I sincerely hope the UN General Assembly will have now the political will to pursue discussion of a declaration on sea level rise. And I am heartened by the knowledge that the President of the UN General Assembly has recently sanctioned the General Assembly to continue advancing the sea level agenda at its meeting next year in 2026. With the broad coverage of support by members of the UN of the principle of statehood continuity and the permanency of maritime boundaries, I am confident that we have made major inroads into influencing international law and state practices in Tuvalu's effort to future-proof our statehood and sovereignty and our maritime boundaries and the right to the resources in those marine zones. There are also recent landmark international judicial developments that have direct influence on clarifying the rights, obligation, and responsibility of states in terms of the impact of climate change. First is the advisory opinion of the International Tribunal on the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, in short, IDLOS, in response to the application by the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law, or COSIS for short, an organization registered with the UN, which is co-led by Tuvalu and Antigua and Barbuda. The International Tribunal was asked for an opinion on the obligation of states to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of on the marine environment in relation to the harmful effect of climate change, including through ocean warming and sea level rise. The International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea opined that greenhouse gas emission pollutes the marine environment, and that states have legal responsibility to take all necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control them. The other international judicial development is the advisory opinion of the ICJ that was only delivered last week. The ICJ was requested to opine on state obligations under international law in respect of climate change and the legal consequences of breach of obligations in respect of climate change. The ICJ opined that states have a duty to prevent significant harm to the environment, and therefore they must act with due diligence and use all means at their disposal to prevent activities carried out in their jurisdiction or under their control from causing significant harm to the climate system. Whilst academics and legal practitioners continue to dissect and analyze the ICJ advisory opinion, in my strong view, both advisory opinions recognize the responsibility of states not to cause harm to the climate system, and they may be held accountable if proven to have caused such harm. Tuvalu welcomes this judicial advisory opinion, which Tuvalu and others will use in our continued advocacy to future-proof our statehood and sovereignty and the permanency of our maritime boundary. The advisory opinions are a significant achievement, moving the conversation from political commitment to legally binding obligations. And Tuvalu has sought political and legal support and recognitions of Tuvalu's continued statehood and the permanency of our maritime boundaries, regardless of the impact of climate change induced sea level rise from our bilateral partners. And that brings me to the third and last focus of my talk concerning the climate cooperation arrangement between Tuvalu and Australia under the landmark Feleti Union Treaty. The Feleti Treaty is now the only such treaty that Australia has with any country in the Pacific. And it is also the only such treaty Tuvalu has with any other country. The treaty has three major schemes, if I may be permitted to call them schemes. The first is the climate cooperation. The second is the migration pathway, which permits Tuvalu citizens to migrate to Australia. And thirdly, the provision of security guarantee by Australia to Tuvalu and the three designated situations. For the purpose of my talk, I will only refer to the climate cooperation arrangement under the treaty, but I will be more than happy to respond to any questions in terms of the other two schemes of the treaty. Under Article 2 of the treaty, Tuvalu and Australia are committed to work together in the face of the existential threat posed by climate change. Tuvalu and Australia also recognize the desire of the people of Tuvalu to continue to live in Tuvalu, that the statehood and sovereignty of Tuvalu will continue regardless of the impact of climate change-induced sea level rise, and that recent technological development provide for additional adaptation opportunity. The treaty also commits Tuvalu and Australia under this climate cooperation scheme to work together to help the citizens of Tuvalu to stay in their homes with safety and dignity, So in terms of Tuvalu's effort to secure legal recognition of its future statehood in the face of climate change-induced sea level rise, this is the first legal precedent, albeit on a bilateral basis. We have also secured legal obligations from Australia to work with Tuvalu to counter the accidental threat posed by climate change and to help citizens of Tuvalu to stay in Tuvalu with safety and dignity. Despite our renewed and elevated diplomatic relationship with Australia, it does not restrain us from calling for Australia to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions or to halt export of fossil fuel. Tuvalu's survival depends on all nations to rapidly transition to renewable energy. And we have been assured that Australia is on target to reach its renewable energy target of 83% renewable electricity by 2030. And in terms of greenhouse gas emission, of 43% below its 2005 level by 2030, and net zero by 2050. Nations cannot continue to prop up the fossil fuel industry and must find urgent pathways to get us back on a trajectory to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius as required by the Paris Agreement. And unfortunately, we have very limited time to do so. Vice Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, I am mindful of our time. And in wrapping up my talk, I would like to leave you with these key messages. Despite the dooming forecast on the impact of climate change, induced sea level rise, on the integrity of Tuvalu's land territory, Tuvalu has spared no efforts in fortifying and consolidating the resilience and adaptability of our coastline through our national flagship adaptation project, TCAP. And I call on Australia and other development partners to equip us with the necessary resource so we can continue to build and enhance the resilience of our coastline and preserve the integrity of our land territory so Tuvalu can continue to live and thrive on their God-given land. Tuvalu will continue to advocate and influence the development of international law and state practices that uphold and recognize the principle of statehood continuity and the permanency of properly demarcated maritime boundaries in the face of sea level rise, with the ultimate objective of having a UN treaty framework on sea level rise that will codify those principles. The Climate Cooperation Scheme of the Feleti Union Treaty between Tuvalu and Australia serves as a platform for cooperation between the two countries on climate actions and to hold each other accountable for our actions or non-actions on climate actions. Respect for each other's sovereignty is at the core of the UN Charter. And it is for that reason that Tuvalu continue to support the right of the Republic of China, Taiwan, to nationhood and have continually called for its admission to the UN and its specialized agencies. Vice Chancellor Bell, I thank you once again for the privilege to deliver this talk here on campus at ANU. And I wish everyone well and a pleasant and wonderful afternoon. Faftailasi, Tuvalu Modertua, Tuvalu for God. I thank you.
Testing. Faftailasi, Prime Minister, thank you for your talk and welcome again to the Australian National University. Good afternoon. My name is Sala George Carter. I'm the director of the Pacific Institute here at the Australian National University, and also a proud Tuvaluan from Nanumea. It's a privilege to have back on campus a great leader, a great mentor, but also an elder from the Pacific, not only from Tuvalu, but across the Pacific region here on campus today. Prime Minister, we have such a great big audience, a great big interest with your talk here today. In fact, we broke the records with the most number of sign-ups to any Pacific event. And so, unfortunately, Prime Minister, we cannot really open up the floor to all our 475 questions. However, you have been kind through the audience to submit a few questions, ranging from 150. And unfortunately, I've been just given a list here that I will ask in terms of your remarks today. But first, maybe we could start with the Feleti. As you mentioned, the two other components in terms of security, but also in the migration pathway. We can start there in terms of what those aspects are.
Certainly, George, and thank you for your kind words. The second scheme under the Feleti Treaty is the migration pathway that provides permanent resident visas for selected Tuvalu citizens to migrate to Australia. We've just completed the ballot 2 weeks ago, and there are, for the first year, this will be an annual intake, but for the first year, it has been agreed. It's not enshrined in the treaty, but it has been agreed by the two countries that there will be only 280 visas that will be provided. These visas are issued on the basis that they are permanent resident visas. Those that are successful in the ballot will be given the visas, permanent resident visas. They can enter Australia, but not necessarily required to remain in Australia. So it's a much more flexible migration pathway relative to the PAC in New Zealand, where you are given initially a work permit. You have to find a job before you come to New Zealand. And of course, you can't change job unless you notify the authorities. But the Feleti visa don't have those conditions. You come here, the moment you arrived in Australia, you are entitled to all the privileges and benefits that are made available to permanent residents of Australia. We are still working out on those details, and Australia Tuvalu have set up programs to help those people that will come under the Feleti visa. And very much the reason why we had to set up a Tuvalu High Commission here in Canberra to also facilitate and support. The other scheme that concern security guarantees, the treaty commits Australia legally. And this is historical, because when Tuvalu gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1978, none of these guarantees were provided. Even until last year, when we brought this treaty, there is no country that is legally committed to come to the aid of Tuvalu, whether in times of security, in terms of military aggression. But the treaty now provides and obligates Australia under three designated scenarios. The first one is when Tuvalu suffers a major natural disaster. Secondly, when Tuvalu suffers a major health pandemic. And thirdly, when Tuvalu is subjected to military aggressions. To trigger the assistance that Australia may provide under that provision, Tuvalu has to request Australia. Australia can't just turn up when there is a disaster or a health pandemic or where there is a military presence in Tuvalu. It needs Tuvalu's permission and request for them to provide assistance. So those are the two schemes. There are other conditions as to how those schemes might apply, but basically that's the other two schemes that the Feleti Treaty entail, including, of course, the climate cooperation arrangement that I spoke to.
Mr. Prime Minister, one of the overwhelming topics that we received was on the digital nation. And in part, of course, as part of Tuvalu's global advocacy in terms of resilience. Could you update us on that project on the digital nation?
I may not have George the details of it, but the general concept is that whatever we have now in terms of our government administrations in terms of documentation concerning our culture and heritage, they need to be digitized and put at a safe platform. In the event that Tuvalu physically may not be habitable and we need to relocate, at least there's a place or a storage somewhere that has all our government critical documents and records. That's in basically the general concept. Of course, there are technological issues and capacity gaps that needs to build. But that is all part of our planning, speculating on the worst case scenario. And for what I spoke in terms of our advocacy, in terms of getting state practices and international law on the principle of statehood continuity and the permanency of our maritime boundaries, that are all part of our attempt to future-proof Tuvalu in all its aspects.
And in this concept of future-proof, one of the general questions that we received looks at what can the Australian public, or generally the Pacific public, how do they participate in this vision of future-proof Tuvalu?
Well, I think in countries that shares the same geographical and physical characteristics as us, like the Marshall Islands, Kiribati. As I mentioned in my talk, there are 4 atoll nations in the world, 3 in the Pacific and 1 in the Indian Ocean, the Maldives. We share the same challenges. So we have been collaborating, and fortunately for us, the Pacific membership has been well and truly behind us. Because although we confront these issues as an all-of-nation challenges, the same issues are confronted by large areas of land in other Pacific islands, although they may have alternative internal relocation options because they have higher grounds. But for their coastal areas, they face the same challenges. So there is unity in the Pacific in terms of our efforts to future-proof our sovereignty.
And in terms of that unity in the work around the Pacific, one opportunity that is in the horizon comes in the area of COP31 and the possibility of Australia hosting that with Pacific Island nations. What are your thoughts on the hosting of the event, and what does that mean for Tuvalu?
Australia has raised this issue bilaterally and on occasions where we have leaders gathering, Australia has requested support. And my general take of it is that there is consensus on that. It hasn't been formalized yet in terms of a decision in our communique. I also understand that the process in identifying the host for the 31st COP is not quite clear. But I'm hoping that the leaders meeting in Honiara in September will present that opportunity for the Pacific to provide a very clear support for Australia's bid. Because in the mind of the leaders of the Pacific, and especially in the case of Tuvalu, we've been making noises around the globe at places far removed from our region. This will be the first opportunity that Australia will bring the 70-odd thousand of delegates closer to the Pacific. And I'm hoping that we can work with the Australian leadership to allow some of the related activities to be held in some of the Pacific countries to expose delegates that only see us on videos and YouTubes, but doesn't have the emotional connections that you get when you're physically there.
Prime Minister, I was fortunate over the weekend to join the other members of the Tuvalu community from across Australia who have travelled to Canberra. And I'd like if you could share with us your vision for the diaspora, the Tuvalu community. What would you like for them to say, especially as with the Feleti? What would be your message, but also a vision for them?
Well, thank you, George. I was quite touched and taken by the many Tuvaluans national that turned up over the weekend and this morning during the official opening of the Tuvalu High Commission here in Canberra, by the passion that they've shown. The migration pathway under the Feleti Treaty, I think there is a major role that our diaspora here in Australia can play in terms of the pastoral care that they can provide, the spiritual guidance that they can provide. I'm very heartened by the presence of two pastors, Tuvaluan pastors that have ministries here, congregations that were also able to take out time to come here, because I think the Tuvaluans that will be migrating on the Feleti pathway, migration pathway, will need their moral and communal support. So I'm glad to see the keen and interest that they have shown by turning up in Canberra to be part of the historical event that we officiated this morning, but we will be having a big bash up to party tonight. Not the kind of bash up that.
Yeah, tō malu te ulo te malo Tuvalu, Feleti penitalateo, I te awa ma te whakaaloalo, ke whātuta ku leo, e sui e te pule o te akonga, kau ngā lue ma whānau akonga ANU, e mori atu te anganga whakawhetai, mo te whakamalo, mo te tūsanga matau no mea, ko tine whaatinoina. Tēlā ko te whapitanga, whapitoa mo te aso tēnei, whakawhetai lasi tau sunga malu. Thank you very much, Honourable Prime Minister. It's a privilege for us to have you here today on our campus, your home here at ANU. It's been a privilege for us to hear your vision, your message, and also clarification on many different areas of what has been on the minds of many, not only here on our bush island of Canberra, but also across Australia, in the area of Feleti, in the area of the ICJ, but also the advocacy on climate change, but also in terms of the future of Tuvalu. Thank you very much for your message, and I'll leave you for the final words.
Thank you, George, and I'm also proud to claim a bit of George, so very much someone, but he has a Tuvalu and peace, so I can also boast that we can claim George as part of Tuvalu, and thank you all, thank you to you, George, for initiating this idea for me to provide a talk this afternoon. And let me thank everyone for the interest shown and for your attendance this afternoon. I hope I didn't disappoint you, but it was a privilege and honor to be back on campus and to share an issue that I and my country are very passionate about. Thank you. Paftelas.
Thanks.